So welcome and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be part of this formation days and to together sharpen our efforts at introducing advocacy at the level particularly of parliaments, of legislatures, of the places where political power and the shape of political policy is really worked out. So thank you for enriching us with your experience and together building, enhancing the African contribution to a theology of advocacy. There are streams of advocacy that flow from especially the North American culture, which is a culture which is very high on advocacy. There are streams of advocacy that are born out of the European experience, especially after the Second World War in the post-Holocaust experience. So there are many streams, but the stream that we want to continue building through our engagement with each other is what is the significance of an African contribution? How do we enhance the overall advocacy of the church by bringing those contributions which are uniquely African to the fore? You know, without thinking, we know it is around things like community, a communal understanding of advocacy, of how things work, of who we are responsible for. So I just say that by way of welcome, that this is a time together to learn from our experience, yes, but to learn from each other's experience to build up a profoundly African contribution to the world and the theology of advocacy. So I say that by welcome. I actually often use, and you must excuse me on two accounts. You must excuse me because I came back from holiday last night, and I thought on holiday I'd have the chance to align the presentation with this year's theme, but of course holidays don't allow you to make that adjustment. So you will see references to last year's theme. Ignore those. At some point in the future, if Dorcas reminds me, I'll adjust it to this year's theme. But the content remains what is important, not the example so much. So just keep an eye, don't be detracted. And secondly, I apologize too, because there will be many moments when I will go right up to the screen to read it, because even with glasses, old age is catching up with me, and old age means your sight shuts down significantly. So excuse me already at the beginning on those two accounts. I would prefer it if we kept questions till after the flow of the presentation, because sometimes the question is answered in a later contribution, and sometimes you need to take the whole of the presentation to really source the question. So if you would just make a note of your questions and we can come back to them. I often refer to a quote of Pope Benedict as being quite foundational in advocacy, in church advocacy. And he says, as we, and look at the words You know, they are almost all the words in a very typical way of Pope Benedict, who is very precise in the use of language. It's the way he does theology with that precision of language and of meaning. So, you know, look at all the words. He says, as we contemplate, important word, the vast amount of work to be done, ongoing. It's not a closed issue that the church has closed on, it's ongoing. We are sustained by our faith that God is present alongside those who come together in his name to work for justice. A joyful task to be accomplished in a spirit of solidarity. Note the key words. He speaks of working for justice. And that is very important in advocacy. The thrust is always justice. I will bring you to another slide later on, but let me just alert you to it now already. Pope Paul VI insight that working for justice is a important part of preaching the gospel, a constituent part. But so it's the working for justice. He insists on a contemplative understanding of it, not a quiet understanding, but that we think about it also and see it not only through the eyes of through our physical eyes, but through the eyes of the heart. That we approach advocacy also as a heart issue. That gives us bigger space than just ideologies. He speaks about being sustained by faith, and as Mike said, the faith dimension is fundamental to our contribution to the world of advocacy, and it's a joyful task. It shouldn't be a drain on us. It should be something that is joyful because it's offering life to people. So make note of that Caritas in Veritate, 78, I think I'm reading there, and just take note of that, and in your own spare time, your quiet time, just make a note of the public significance of words like contemplate, spirit of solidarity, justice. All of those words are not just church words. They are words that have a public significance. And that is critical. The public significance of our privately held beliefs. We believe privately in things. Every time those of you who go to church, who know on a Sunday, we say the creed. I believe in God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. What does that mean publicly? If God's made heaven and earth, that's a privately held belief I have. But what does it mean? What's its significance in the public domain? What is its significance to the environment? So you see what I'm saying? That we have these theological ideas, these faith ideas, and we think sometimes they're just ours. We own it privately. But in reality, they have deep public significance. Very key to understanding advocacy. Can we move to the next slide, please? So a close reading of that definition, which I think is so important for us. A close reading, and for those of you who are not South African, this is a picture of the great South African hero, Steve Biko, the real articulator of Black consciousness and Black theology in the South African situation. He was killed by the South African police while in prison, and on the 11th of September, I think it was, and is much admired and loved in this country. So, to get back to the definition, what does a close reading of that definition take us to? It takes us to many things, as I said, but let's, for the purposes of this discussion, say that it's a task that we must engage in. It isn't optional. Working for justice is not optional. It's a constituent element of preaching gospel. That's Pope Paul in his encyclical Justice in the World, paragraph 6. He says that working for justice is a constituent. Let's just have a look at that word, constituent. What does constituent mean? It means that if it's not there, if it's not present, then your definition is skewed. So that's, you can say I'm Catholic or I'm Christian or whatever the religious beliefs you have. But if you say I'm Christian and you're not working for justice, then your definition is wrong. You can say I read the Bible. You can say I say my prayers, go to church, maybe even go to church in the week. But that's all good. That's not the only definition. The definition of working for justice is an element. If you've not got that, then you're not truly Christian or Catholic. So it's a very important part. And it means that it's everybody's business. If I had $1, just because my mind is still there at the moment, for every time somebody said to me, it's not everybody's calling in the church. I'm sure people say that to you too. Yeah, it's for you guys. You must carry the flag for us. We are starting prayer groups and we're going to be working with the sodalities. But you must work for, as if it's for some people to do. This definition tells us it's everybody's work. So just, I emphasize that because it is so vital. It's a question of faith. The key way that we look at advocacy, which is different maybe in some aspects, not all aspects, but it would be different, for instance, to the way a Marxist group looks at it, maybe the way the trade unions look at it. We'd have a lot in common, that's for sure. But what is significant about us? It's how we understand the public dimensions of our faith. If I'm a Marxist, I don't have to worry about faith because it's not part. I worry about historical analysis. That's my contribution. If I'm a trade unionist, I see it out of the perspective of the conditions of the working class. Christian, or the Muslim or the Buddhist, sees it out of the experience of faith. And just think on a tangent. Just think what the story of the Exodus means if you're talking about people who are poor. Just think what the story I mentioned earlier of creation means if you're thinking of environmental ethics. So faith has a different but complementary way of looking at things. But if the overall work of advocacy is not, doesn't have that dimension, advocacy is the poorer for it. So just bear that in mind. It's an engagement to be done with others. In other words, we work in partnerships. We work with other people. We don't have all the answers. We don't have everything it takes. We've got to work with others. Others bring other insights. They bring other wisdom to the task. And we've got to be open to that and enriched by it, just as we enrich others. I've spoken about justice, and it's done in solidarity. I think that is very key to our understanding of faith in action. For those of you who enjoy theology, or for those of you who had to pass theology in order to get to your present jobs, look at something like the Holy Trinity. We speak about God as, in the traditional language, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier in the more modern term. But what are we saying? We're saying that God is three persons in one. Now, it's not a mathematical problem. It's a religious symbol. Three people who are equal. Different manifestations. They look different. Different jobs to do, but equal. Three equal persons. Sharing in one overall ministry to the human race. That's solidarity. Where we share a commitment to the human race, but we come at it differently, but we're all equal. So that is how solidarity works. That's what holds solidarity together. So just picture something more than a working arrangement. In the world, solidarity is a working arrangement. Kenya and South Africa can agree on something. We form a partnership about it, and we say we're acting in solidarity. It's really an agreement between us. Solidarity is much deeper recognition of things, much deeper hope that's expressed. Can I have the next slide, please? Just a quote I like. It's apropos, nothing in particular, about everything in general. Some are guilty, but all are responsible. Famous Rabbi Herschel. And many of you who've done philosophy will know that. Okay, can we have the next? And that's just partly to remind us that we are all responsible. And I think I put it in, or I know I put it in at the time, because in this country, as in many of the countries we represent, it's easy to say, for instance, for us, it's the whites' problem. They created this mess. Let them sort it out. We're not guilty of creating it. We're the victims. And I'm sure you've heard that talk because it flows through many of our countries. Maybe not in terms of black and white, but in terms of race, in terms of also class, in terms of all sorts of other things. So it just says that advocacy is not only, we can't say we're not going to be involved in advocacy because we're the victims. It's not about guilt, it's about responsibility. So just a thought. Some of the other stuff. God is back. We all know that for decades, our worldview has excluded God. God has been privatized. God is for your private Sunday thing. God is not in the public space. But that is changing. It has changed. The last 20 or so years, God is back in the public discussion. Because people of faith like us are taking our role in public life, God is back in public discussion. So it's no longer about leaving God out because God is personal and private. It's about bringing God in because many of the activists come from a faith tradition and are making vital contributions. Religion has surfaced strongly, that's just what I said. This raises, for us in the advocacy world, three very basic challenges. One, the challenge to bring our policies, our politics, in line with our beliefs. I've been speaking about that all the time. So I'm just underlining something that is so central. We've got to bring our politics and our beliefs into one expression. So I believe in the communion of saints. I say that every Sunday in the Creed. But how does that apply to issues of migration? If we are all one communion of saints, baptized or not baptized, but one people made in the image of God, then how do I take that bit of private knowledge and bring it in line with what I say about immigrants and migrants and people who are crossing the borders without status? So we've got to bring that in line. That's also the second point. And the third point is that we've got to also take time, and that's part of what we're doing. We've got to take time to develop our professional competencies. When we go into Parliament and make a submission, we cannot say simply, the Bible says. Because, well, for those in the Parliament who are not Christian, who are Muslim or Jewish or atheists, that means nothing to them. Or they might read that passage differently to us. We can't just go into Parliament and say the Pope says. So what? No. We've got to find a way of developing also our competencies, our skills, so that when we talk professionally. We're not experts. Our expertise is in faith. But we can't simply ignore. You cannot go into Parliament and say, let me give you a very simple example, but it works. Because this has been my experience. You cannot just go into Parliament and say, there are many immigrants who are making a vital contribution to South African economy, even though it's in the informal. You can say that. That's not a professional statement. You've got to be able to say many studies show that the informal sector, even by government standards, amounts to this contribution to the economy. And we know from studies and from the census documents that X amount of that is by people who are not documented. Then we have an argument. But what have we done? We've developed our competency. Because people will not give us a second chance if we simply say many people, or there is a feeling in the community, or the community says. That's nonsense. Might be true, but it's nonsense. You've got to be able to show that you are competent in making the statements that you make. So we've got to develop our competencies.
The second challenge?
The second challenge is linked to the first, the challenge of giving public expression to our private beliefs. So the first is to bring our beliefs in line, to bring our politics in line with our beliefs. The second is to give public expression to those beliefs, like I was saying. If you say I believe in God, then you are talking about equality between three people. And then the last one is our competencies. The great American cardinal who was very influential in bringing this kind of thinking to the public and to the church, Cardinal Bernardin, who was the Archbishop of Chicago for many years, Those of you who studied in the States might know of him. He says, I'm convinced that the Catholic moral tradition has the scope, the strength, and the subtlety to address the wide range of issues effectively. The vision joins the humanity of the unborn infant and the humanity of the hungry. It calls for positive legal action to prevent the killing of the unborn or the aged, and the positive societal action to provide shelter for the homeless and education for the illiterate. Now, in recent times, Pope Francis has come back to that statement. In his document, I know he's not sure which one comes first, Exultate et Gaudate, or the other way around, but one of the two comes first and one comes second. He says that you can't prefer one to the other. You can't prefer and say, well, we're going to be very anti-abortion, but then be pro-capital punishment. You cannot say that the plight of migrants is less important than abortion. They all belong together. That's one of the important contributions that our faith makes. Next slide, please. So, that's very public and very introductory in terms of theology. But in theology, we always ask, what's the deeper question? What's the deeper theory that supports all of those grand things that I've just said? And they are grand things. They are a wonderful contribution to the world of advocacy. But what's underneath it? What lies underneath it that holds it together, that allows this kind of work to flow? When the Catholic imagination envisions a just society, it depicts a situation in which human beings are in right relationships with each other. That's a key. And I will expand on it a little just now. That is a key. Our understanding of the basic theology that holds this grand view of advocacy together is that we are a community who are in just, correct relationships with each other. That means some are not more equal than others. That's not a just or a right relationship. Whether it be a racial thing, whether it be a class, whether it be religious, whether it be gender, orientation, any of those issues, they are not the primary issues that determine how we legislate. Are you with me? They are not the primary issue on which we legislate and understand policy and view policy is the correct, just relationships between us. That's what solidarity means as well. So when we in theology talk about the underpinnings of advocacy, we're talking about the relationships that are just, as the scripture says, that are pleasing to God, that respect me as an equal no matter what my race, class, color, gender, orientation, any of those issues are. That's not why some people, and you see this is very common today, and it's not bad, but it's not the full picture. Some people are we must do policy to have a racial benefit. Or we must do policy because different gender have been discriminated or different orientations have not been respected, so we've got to do catch up. That's true, I'm not disregarding, but that can't be the only thing. The big overall thing of which that is part is right relationships. Oh yeah, sorry. It entails more than the regulation of personal rights. Within the Catholic tradition, the human good is related to the experience of community. It's the experience of community. I spoke about the Trinity, one community of different persons with different ministries or jobs, but one community. And it's that relationship and that community, the communal dimension of our faith, that is the lens through which we see everything. Now, in Africa, we are very fortunate because we have the concept of Ubuntu. I am who I am because of others, just as others are who they are because of me. And that is exactly what we understand in our tradition. This is and that's the outcome of it. The Catholic understanding of justice demands the creation of a genuine community where rights are respected, but where more is necessary to bring out the best of the common good. So that's where the rub is. That's the heart of it. Relationships in a community that are just. No privileges, no special status people, but all of us together because we're made in the image and the likeness of God. Next slide, please. How are we doing for time?
11:15.
And 12 we finish for lunch.
I still have that program.
Yeah, well, okay. Oh, so we've got lots of time. So if that's what our heart is, in theology, what do we call all of this? It's called public theology because it deals with the public. So, those of you who enjoy theology and know that you can get sacramental theology, which is about the sacraments, but Mass and confession and forgiveness. Or you can get liturgical theology, how we say Mass and do those kinds of things. This is public theology because it relates to the public life, to the life we share with everybody else. So it is to create the theology that is accessible to other people so as to avoid sectarianism or the withdrawal of Christians from public discourse. Pope Benedict says we must prevent, I want you to take a note of this as I should, prevent the withdrawal or evasion present in the theological and spiritual speculation which could serve as an escape from concrete historical responsibility. In other words, the Pope is saying we all have a concrete historical responsibility, not just a responsibility, that would be important enough, but a concrete one in the here and now, in the making of history. That's our responsibility. And that's the heart of public theology, to take responsibility for the things that allow us to make history and to do it properly. This is quite interesting. Let me just take a glass of water because it's only 11:15 and I seem to have been speaking for hours and hours already. Okay. This is just something that you might John Allen, who is who writes a lot on Pope Francis, he says that if you analyze Pope Francis's work, you will see that there is a desire to foster social activism, and especially direct and concrete forms of service, and to put the poor in a position to be heard in discussions about how to solve their own problems. That's interesting, isn't it? He says that it is the heart of Pope Francis is to foster social activism. And I think you can see it in his writing, but you can also see it in the talks he's given to indigenous communities, but also to social activists in the South American context. So he's much more concerned about inspiring the people to regain their own agency. That you and I are agents. We don't need other people to speak for us. We need to be given the voice to speak for ourselves. And that's a big part of what our advocacy does. We don't come into Parliament as experts talking on behalf of the others. We come in as people who have given agency to, who have been given agency to articulate what they want, but now we are able to draw together and present to Parliament not what we think is best for them, but we present to Parliament what they say is best for themselves. Got it? That's quite important, because sometimes we think we're very great and grand and we talk on behalf of the poor. We talk on behalf of women. We talk on behalf of gays or lesbians or transgender people. No, all of those people should speak for themselves. And we should convey that, because we have the skills and the language, we should be able to convey that to Parliament. Not what we think about those issues. What I think about the poor or transgendered people is not as important as what they think about themselves and what they want to see happen about themselves. So this is a very, and this sums it up. Traditionally, the church has tried to bring change through leadership. But now we're at the point, this says, and it's true in Pope Francis's writing, where we are getting people to speak for themselves. And that's where change should happen. And if you think about some of the big events of social change in history, in contemporary history, it's where the people have taken to the streets, isn't it? The Philippines, India, this country, the civil rights movement in the United States. Didn't wait for other people to talk, took it into their own hands and did something about it. So, and that's where in theology today, the emphasis lies. It no longer is on what are the leaders saying, it's what are the people saying, and how do the leaders present that accurately in the wider public. Next one. No, I think, yeah, let's just halt there. And maybe this is a little time for questions, partly because I want to fill up my water and because I want to sit down for a moment. So, you know, I'm making it sound as if it's part of the program. Yeah. But it isn't, it's just me getting tired. Yeah. Any questions, any comments? I mean, it's not so much the questions, I'm interested in your observations in what you think about this so far, and even more particularly, how it applies to your own situation. The floor is open, as they say.
I'll start to comment.
Yes, I thought that might start there.
Yeah. Yes, no, even our faith even the creed lives in God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, communitarian. We have stressed much about advocacy being an issue for the community.
Yeah.
And should be communitarian. Now, when you look at the reality these days, it seems this sense of communitarian is phasing out even in the African context.
Mm.
You go to the cities, people want to construct a home, the first thing they will do is to construct a fence. A fence around themselves. And the children are locked up within those fences. Don't even interact with the others, And even, I think even Pope Francis has said it, even communities, even families have no time to talk.
Yeah,
As a community, they're busy on their social media. Social media, watching whatnot. So I think this was a challenge to the modus operandi that you're suggesting of advocacy using the community. I don't know what to think about that.
I think that it is exactly the challenge. That's why we have to go back to the thinking. We can't say that the thinking is irrelevant because the examples against it are multiplying. We have to say because they are multiplying, it's now more important for our voice and our thinking to be present in the public space. Otherwise, we are allowing the thinking of the world, and in this case, especially the thinking of capitalism, to determine how we do advocacy. And that can't be right. We have to determine our prophetic contribution to the public life. And our prophetic contribution is to say, we break that down and we have a better way of relationships. Otherwise, we're allowing the present to determine our narrative, and that can't be right. Yes.
Yeah, just maybe to add on that. So if we see what is happening in the world today, where families are being now defined. So it's like we have a nuclear family, we have this family, we have that and that and that. So in the past, we used to, should I use the word, we used to look at the elderly as our living libraries. Because
What a lovely way of putting it. Thank you.
yeah. So so it's like things were taught around the campfire.
Yeah.
So the elderly would narrate stories orally, actually kind of disseminating this wisdom to the young ones. And it was like, yeah, it is like written, let's say, across their heart. So it remains there. So without even maybe reading and what. But now that is like the reflection of yesterday, when we say how elderly people are now being abused, being accused of being witches and that and that. So that actually is kind of like, maybe to use the words there, is like now, it's like running away from the communitarian life. So moving towards the private now. So that communitarian life is no longer relevant, so to say. Because now, So yeah, I think maybe we can say, how do we go back to the basics? Because indeed, yeah. So how do we go back to the basics to say a communitarian life is actually, it's like all of us are looking through that lens to take us to the future. Yeah, so.
And that would be very much Catholic social teaching, that we view everything through a communitarian lens. Because if we don't, then we will start saying, well, then capitalism is fine, because some get, some don't.
Yes.
But if we say that if some don't get, we break down the communitarianism, then it's not fine. Then we've got to find another economic policy, which is also what the Pope has been suggesting recently. He's a very troublesome Jesuit, that. Just say that to the Jesuits.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and of course, family is going through a whole redefinition.
Yes.
I was having dinner last week with a friend of mine who's a pastor of a parish in New York. And he was talking about catechesis. And he was talking about a new building that was being built that was a skyscraper and just like all these modern things. And he said, oh, the architect is in our parish. And then he said, and he and his husband's children are in the catechism program. And you just realize that definitions are changing for people. It's a family of 2 male parents and their children, and they working in the church. Or their children are at catechism like any other family. And you just say, well, things, you can't be so clear cut on what family is anymore, that it's mommy, daddy, and 2 children. Other ways are coming in, which we might not always want to approve of, but they're there. But that's just a comment on the family, yeah. All the way from Namibia. Good. Shall we get back to our program?
Yes.
When we talk about citizenship, remember now we're talking about solidarity, we're talking about communitarianism, about just relationships. And one of the public ways that that's spoken about is citizenship. If we take our lens as being a communitarian lens, Ubuntu, working, forming each other, just relationships, then we need to develop an informed, active, participating, interested people. A people can only participate if they have the opportunity to think through things for themselves. So what we are saying in Catholic social teaching, when it comes to advocacy, not only are these our ideas, but Catholic social teaching also shows us that what we need to be developing so that they have their agency and can talk for themselves is that they are active, informed, active, participating, and interested people. And I think in justice and peace, we do a lot of that, isn't it? We build up communities that are informed. We help people to understand why there is rain that isn't coming in the wrong seasons. That is not God, that's climate change, which is happening because people are making profits out of destroying the earth. So we've got to inform people as a help to them. We've got to help them to be active, to participate in structures. That's what advocacy is also about, participating in structures. Saying, here's a group, my faith tells me this is the right thing to do, but here's a group that can help me do it. I can be in solidarity with them. So we've not only got to inform people and say, look, have you thought of this? Have you understood it as coming to us in this way? But we also have to encourage them to be active. And sometimes that activism is outside the church too. So, just active, informed, and they need to participate. It's no use people sitting back. I think that's one of the worst things in the church, in all our churches, whatever kind, all our faiths even, is that people just don't seem to have the energy to do things about justice.
Oh, yes.
They don't have the energy to do things about the education of their children or tackling big business or gender issues. They just haven't got the energy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we need to really work at. 3 concepts. Got to build up citizens in our advocacy. We've got to understand our theology, not as something we are apologetic about, trying to explain, but as something we use as a tool for developing advocacy. And the communitarian vision is the deep theory of Catholic social teaching and advocacy. So it's about communitarianism, it's about helping to find public expressions of our faith and about engaging and reflecting and being active. So those three really sum up where we are in theology at this part of our program. You know, all that I've been saying really boils down. I mean, I could have just got up and said these three things, but then, you know, I wouldn't have earned my pay for the day. So these three things is what they boil down to. Okay, here I've gone in to just, this is really for your footnotes when you're doing work yourself. All I've been saying, I'm just showing where there are reflections of it. Gaudium et Spes, the document of Vatican II, number 75. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, numbers 1913 to 1915. That's not the years, that's just the paragraphs. And those two will help very strongly to get some of the thinking that I've been explaining. So just those two as footnotes to help you when you when you're next looking at things. The American bishops, before every presidential election, so they're doing one now, put out a document helping people to discern what and how they should vote, what they should, not who they should vote for, but what they should bear in mind when they vote. These days, it's less prophetic than it was in the 80s. The 80s and even the 90s, it was very sharp, very prophetic, very powerful. Now it's gone a bit wishy-washy. The bishops are very divided amongst themselves, and so it's gone a bit wishy-washy. But I give you an example there of we're called to bring together just some of the things I've been saying. This is the document of 1986 or 1990, and they give the same principles from social teaching as we've been looking at. There's nothing new in that, but it's a confirmation of that being one of the ways of discernment that is active in the church and helpful. Okay, this is something that I think is really important to our work. James Gustafson, who teaches theology in Atlanta in the USA, has written very extensively on advocacy and, if you like, in the bigger sense of the word, publication. And he says, but not publication only in publications in the broadest sense. He says that when we do advocacy, we have to be aware of 4 categories that is active. And he says we can write about advocacy, we can do advocacy from any of those 4 dimensions: prophetic, narrative, technical, or policy. And his understanding is that if you look at the Bible and you look at those people who worked for justice, their work for justice came out of one of those 4 models. It's very interesting. I mean, we don't have the time and I don't have the background for all of it, but he writes incredibly interestingly. He says that sometimes the advocacy is prophetic. Think of Micah and Amos. When Micah calls the rich woman, you cows, of Bashan. You're lying on your settees the whole day long while the poor are starving. That's prophetic. No, thus says the Lord. It's prophetic. And sometimes we get up and we say those kinds of things in the public space. It's a prophetic strong call. We've been seeing it a lot in the issues around the Middle East, Gaza. You have to be prophetic. Call out people who are doing wrong and name them. It's prophetic. Sometimes it's narrative. Jesus is very good at that, where he makes very strong points, but he tells a story. Fig trees, olive branches. He's not very prophetic in that way, but the story is prophetic. The story gives a lesson. That's a narrative approach. It's true, sometimes we tell stories, don't we, in order to make a point. And the point is clear. I saw you under the fig tree. It's a story, but the point is clear. The prophets, it's prophetic. It's Micah, Amos, condemning, shouting. Sometimes it's technical and ethical. There are lots of those examples. Examples around how we do the Last Supper, the Passover. It gives the technical details, but every one of those details point to something deeper, like the Exodus, the liberation of people. So it's ethical, it's technical. We have very strict instructions for how the lamb should be chosen for sacrifice, how it should be sacrificed, how clean the room should be of any bread or anything. Very technical. But the technicalities are not the only point. The technicalities point to something far deeper. And sometimes it's policy modes. Sometimes we're given a policy, the 10 Commandments, the Sermon on the Mount. These are policies that Jesus offers, which have public significance. So James Gustafson says very clearly that if we're going to do advocacy properly in the spirit of faith, we should look at these 4 ways that he sees in the Bible of doing advocacy by different people employing different methods. And I think we all do all of it, but for most of us, because of our circumstances, maybe 1 or 2 are the dominant. Any sense of which ones you use in your work most often? And if you think, I hope I've explained each of the 4. If you think of that, which ones are you using in your work?
Narrative.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, it's easier to pass on a message with maybe an event that has happened.
Okay, yes, yes.
So when you have that event that has happened and you try to advocate for it, for example, there's a situation of maybe, farming. Once there's a lot of food being exported outside. So you use that story to advocate for those that are starving.
Good example, thank you. Father, I saw you end up. Or was I miss?
I was actually going to say the same thing, but I'm now thinking of being prophetic.
Yeah, let's
Thinking of
hear.
an example, yeah. Just thinking of an example. Yeah.
So
While I'm thinking over this.
yes, now we'll pass on.
Yeah.
We'll come back to you.
Yeah.
So the example will have to be very good, because now you've had extra time to think. Ma'am,
So I'm thinking policymakers. We engage with the policymakers because it's easier when you have a sit down with the policymakers and try to make them, actually you make them understand why you're advocating for or against a certain
Yeah.
policy, and they're very, that's the area they thrive in. So they'll have to listen to you and maybe probably make a decision that will favor you or won't favor you.
and do you find they thinking at the back of their minds about votes? That they might say you're right, but this will never go down in my
Yes.
constituency
Yes.
or in this county.
Yes, they do. But I think Mike said, I think on Monday, he said, when you sit down with policymakers, the intention is not to force them
No,
to make decisions based on what you believe. That's like there's no way we can force them to make decisions
no,
based on our beliefs. It's just to make them see where we are coming from. At the end of the day, they're the ones who will make the decision. So it's just to give them
that's
our
very
point,
right,
our
yeah.
point of view.
it's very right. And to offer them also a different way of seeing things.
Yeah.
If you only see things out of the way you've been brought up, you might not see it from another angle,
Yes.
and we have to bring that angle in. So we have 4 there: prophetic, narrative, technical, policy. We're all working in the area, so it would be useful to see where we use most of our energy.
Yeah. I don't know, let me try to give this one. I'm thinking in terms of being prophetic. So when it comes to like elections, so we always say we encourage people to vote for people who will listen to them. That means these people who will be like open up a dialogue with them. So now I was thinking about, if we go back to the Bible, so we look at the Trinitarian life of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that there is always dialogue, that active dialogue. Yeah, because in the book of Genesis, we are told that, you see, even God the Father consulted the other two when he said, let us make human beings in our own image.
Absolutely.
Consultation was there. Yeah, so that's the
Dialogue, I mean, I should have mentioned that. The quality, but it's also dialogue between, absolutely, very, very well put, thank you. Anything from French-speaking Africa? Or the Lusophone countries?
Yes,
Yeah.
well,
Speaks well.
I think, well, in my work as just some peace commission, it's more prophetic. Well, I'm one of the priests that in the capital, Rwanda, was asked by the bishops to say this televised mass. And for the past 5 years, I became persona non grata for the government. Why? Because simply I denounce social injustices. Of course, without pointing names and all that, but I look at the situation, poverty, corruption, misery, and of course, all those social injustices, I denounce them. Of course, you, and also on radio, because I'm a commentator on Catholic radio station. And we get the feedback from Pua, who can say that, yeah, this is trying to do advocacy. He's feeling our sorrows, our problems, our his is doing real advocacy, get this feedback. And of course, those in power, they don't like it.
No.
And once I was with my spiritual director as a Dominican, and I was wondering, but why is that I'm not doing anything wrong? I'm just saying that there's no water, there's no food and all that. He said, yeah, you know, for you it's a pastoral way, but for them this is politics, real politics. He said, but no, but I'm not even inviting people to vote this and that. And all. He said, no, that's not the point. When you say that there's no water, who is in power? Who is supposed to give water? People, food, school, health, care, who? Of course, when we are saying that there is nothing like it available, they feel bad, and that's it. And that's it. And there was pressure because at least 4 or 5 times I was called by the Archbishop of Rwanda twice, by the president of the conference twice, to tell me that the power asked the bishops so that they could try to stop me, because I'm trying to 2002 election, 2022 elections, and they claimed that the most dangerous person was not even the opposition party, but it was this priest who uses radio, uses TV to try to not undermining, I mean, to speak against this injustice and all that. And that I feel maybe I fit in this category, the prophetic.
Very definitely, yes. Well done, well done. Very good news. To be despised by the government is good news. Mostly. Any example from the from the Francophone countries where they feel their work is more effective? Huh? Yeah,
If I may,
yes, of course you
I
may.
also remembered, just
Exactement, merci Père. Je n'interviens pas beaucoup parce que moi-même,
I don't intervene much because myself,
Yeah, yeah.
je n'interviens pas beaucoup parce que moi-même,
I don't
Au-delà
intervene
des
much
avocats,
because,
au-delà d'être avocat, donc,
because besides being advocate,
je suis rentré aux études
I went back to study
pour l'enseignement social de l'Église.
the social teaching.
Nous avons l'Institut
We have the Institute
panafricain
Pan-African
pour l'enseignement
Institute
social de l'Église,
of Social Teaching of
Cardinal
Church,
Martino.
Cardinal
de Kinshasa.
Martino of Kinshasa.
Et depuis l'année passée, nous avons commencé,
And
disons,
since
en
last year,
2022,
in 2022,
nous avons commencé un master professionnel.
well, we started the professional master,
Ah,
Et je dois terminer en juillet ici.
and they have to finish in July.
Donc, je suis vraiment au parfum de ce que vous dites là.
So I found myself very well in your teaching,
Mais sauf que je voulais revenir
but I wanted to come back
sur la perception,
on the perception.
la perception. Comment est-ce qu'on vit Dieu dans la sphère publique?
Comment?
Vous avez dit que Dieu avait été exclu,
You said that God has been excluded,
mais avec notre engagement,
but
un
with,
petit nombre,
with our engagement, a small number,
Dieu est en train de rentrer dans cet espace public.
God is coming back in that space, in that public space.
Et là, j'ai noté attentivement les 3 défis.
And I have noted the 3 conflicts.
D'abord, la réconciliation de notre foi.
The reconciliation of our faith with the political parties,
La conscience professionnelle, c'est-à-dire l'amélioration de nos compétences,
professional conscience,
l'expertise qu'on doit avoir pour agir sur les parlements, afin que les parlementaires nous prennent comme des acteurs
so that the parliament can
pas
take
seulement
part
religieux,
as not only religious,
qui viennent parler de la Bible,
who comes to speak of the Bible,
qui viennent parler d'une façon
but who comes to speak in a way,
précise
but who comes to speak precisely
sur les faits sociaux.
on the social effects.
Mais je voulais que vous reveniez un peu
But-
sur la deuxième,
But
le deuxième défi.
But I wanted you to come a little bit on the second conflict.
Parce que la connexion avait un peu.
Because the internet connection is not that stable.
Alors notre interprète n'a pas bien donné ça.
Because our translator did not translate that to us.
Second one, and that was about bringing, giving public expression to our faith. That was what the second one was. And I had been talking quite a lot about that. And Father also gave a very good example where, for instance, to talk about the Trinity is to talk about the dialogue between equals. Firstly, the recognition of equality. And secondly, a dialogue amongst equals so that the best can come forward without taking away any of the specifics about any individual. So to be equal doesn't mean to be a male if you're a female. It means about being the best of who you are, or about being rich if you are poor. It's about expressing ourselves in our situation, but knowing that no matter what we look like, we are equal. So whether we look poor or look rich, whether we look black or look white, whether we look green or orange, we are equal. And it's and we create spaces and systems of dialogue so that that can be expressed. Does that help you, Father? That's what the second one was all about.
Est-ce que je répondu à votre question?
Oui, j'ai bien compris, facile.
Yes, I understand now better.
Mais sauf que je voulais préciser, je voulais assurer les pères que
But I wanted to reassure you that
chez nous, nous vivons cette
in our country,
situation en bas.
we do experience that too much because the church,
L'Église, par rapport aux différents régimes politiques,
because the church
se sont succédés,
that has succeeded,
les régimes politiques qui sont succédés,
the regime which has been following each other,
l'Église catholique
the
a su
Catholic Church
garder
were able to
une
keep
position, disons,
the position
parce qu'il se réfère aux valeurs
because they are referring to the
de
value
l'enseignement social de l'Église.
Yeah.
of social
Ils changent
Catholic
pas.
teaching. So they don't change it.
Yeah.
C'est comme ça que vous apprenez que le cardinal,
So this is how you learn that the cardinal,
qui est par exemple le président de Chéam aussi,
who is the president of SICAM,
a des problèmes avec les pouvoirs politiques en place.
has a conflict problem avec
Les pouvoirs politiques, les régimes politiques qui est en place.
with the political parties.
Alors que, il y a quelques années seulement,
But only a few years ago,
tous ces soi-disant opposants il n'y a pas longtemps,
all the opposite not long ago,
étaient là derrière l'Église
were beyond the church
pour demander sa médiation, sa force, sa protection, tout ça.
to claim his protection
Yeah.
and all of that.
Et aujourd'hui,
And today,
les gens, par exemple, du président Kabila,
people like the president,
non, les collaborateurs, ceux qui gèrent pas depuis quoi,
all collaborator of the former president Kabila,
font profil bas et viennent à l'Église,
are coming to church.
comptent sur l'Église.
They are counting on the church.
Donc, nous sommes sûrs que demain, quand ça va changer,
So we are sure that
ceux
tomorrow,
qui sont pas aujourd'hui
if it
viendront encore à
change,
l'Église.
pardon,
Ceux qui seront là au pouvoir maintenant fort
those
viendront à l'Église.
those who have power, they are going to come back to church.
It's a very interesting situation. Thank you.
12, 11.
Right. Okay, I think we'll break there, and after lunch we'll pick up on some of these things. But again, I want us to be very mindful of these four categories, because it helps us to know out of which tradition we are speaking, and also then to explore the tradition. So this is very, very, I mean, everything is critical, otherwise we wouldn't be speaking about it, but this is very important and gives us a very distinctive understanding of what we're doing. Okay, shall we make a move and start? And Henry will no doubt feel the intensity of our engagement and he will come running back to join us. So welcome back, everybody. It's not the easiest session. This is called the graveyard session because most people, including presenters, tend to be somewhat in siesta land. So what I want to do in this session is to look at some of the strategies that we've looked at this morning, or if we've not looked at it, we've implied them, and to look at how other people, other ways of advocacy confirm the kinds of things that we're doing. One of the strong voices in countries like the US and the European countries is around social organizations doing advocacy, and they put forward their own principles. Very articulate person in this area is a guy called Saul Alinsky, who was an American organizer of communities and built communities from the bottom up. As I said this morning in our theological reflection, giving people agency so that they could speak and do advocacy for themselves. And once he had an intern for a year or two, who became quite famous after that. A man, a little half Kenyan, half American, called Barack Obama. People have heard of him later in life. So thanks to your country for producing. I'm not sure you want to be proud of, but anyway.
Very welcome.
So he says, and we think that this is really very close to us, very close to the expression of how we do advocacy in terms of a theological understanding, but this is close from a secular point of view. Firstly, it is institutional in that it works through institutions. That's very key for us. We don't work off our own bat. We don't work, are we having translation problems?
Connection.
Internet connection, I think is not.
Oh. First world countries that can't keep connection. So it's institutional in that it works through institutions. And that's very important for us. Because when we do advocacy in the church, we are dealing with an institution. And all of us work in institutional settings. So a big focus of our work is relating as institutions. We don't relate as free agents. If I was just working for myself and had an NGO for myself, I don't have to then relate institutionally or bear that in mind. I can just do what I like. But this is institutional. And so working and finding ways to work with institutions, through institutions, in institutions is a very important part of how we work. It allows certain possibilities to happen, but also excludes other possibilities. And we need to know that when we begin, that we work through institutions. And we come back to this again. We come back again to the idea of relationships. Even in the secular world, in the non-church or non-faith world, it's about building up relationships. And those of us who've been in this for a long time, we know the importance of it. Because it's not about one-offs. It's about building trust through relationships with people who you can work with, other organizations, but also the people in Parliament. You don't just they don't just open their door to you and tell you their deepest secrets of the caucus or of the party. It's a trust you have to build up. They will talk to you as they feel they can trust you. They will also talk to you, it is true, to the degree that they think you're influential in a place where they want votes. But I mean, it's really about relationships. So the relationships, that long-term relationships as a basis for common action. Advocacy is broad-based. We've seen that in other areas where we work right from the beginning with Pope Benedict's definition. We see how we work with people who think like us in the main. They're not necessarily all thinking exactly like us, but we have areas of commonality. We have areas that we share. We have areas where we have the same commitment to the common good. And that is generally a good enough basis for us to start working on. I think it's going to be interesting in South Africa to see in the next few days how a government of national unity forms, because it's going to have to be to some degree. Nobody's going to have all they want and ask for. No party is going to have everything they want and ask for. There's going to have to be some compromise, and that compromise will have to be built on the degree to which we feel we can share things. So broad-based, but things we share, things we hold in common is pretty important for achieving good advocacy in the end. It's non-partisan, but intensely political. And that's important. It's political. As Father was saying to us, the work he does is political, but it's not party political. It doesn't favor one party against another. That's what party politicians have to do. They have to develop the spin around what their party can do, what their party is capable of, what possibilities exist. But ours is political in that it enters the heart of politics, but it's not partisan. So we have four very basic principles that are shared by a kind of theological faith vision of advocacy, and that are also shared by many secular organizations. And I think, for better or worse, it's one of the good set of boxes to tick when you're doing advocacy, to acknowledge that you're working in an institutional environment, and that has its definite possibilities, but it also has definite curbs. So to note again, as we have throughout this talk, that it is fundamentally relational. It's about building up relationships that are relationships that generate the power that's able to move issues forward and that's able to convince. Thirdly, it is broad-based in that we don't have partners who think exactly like us and want exactly the same things. That seldom happens. But what we are looking for here are people who share enough of an interest with us, enough of a commitment, enough of a commitment to the common good for us to be able to do something together. This is just for your reflection later. The methods are pragmatic. Look for where people gather. Identify where these institutions have mutual self-interest and build on it for local achievable campaigns. Develop relationships. Nothing can substitute for the face of communities, the strongest institutions with the deepest roots were faith-based. That's what they found in surveys around the world. And in fact, in a very recent survey again, across the world, looking at where the sources of power lay, faith communities and NGOs were recognized as being just below businesses and the corporate world in some areas for being able to shift and move opinions. So it's not to be looked at lightly or taken lightly. And yeah, so this is just a commitment, a comment for you to look at later when you have time. This is a definition, a nice short definition that I think has many of the characteristics that we've been speaking about all morning. And it's by it's a comment in a book by a sociologist called Bernstein, and he says that what we're doing in advocacy, what we really need to do is to create the types of spaces in which people can come together and debate, in which they can encounter each other in formation, in clarification, in the testing of opinions, where judgment, deliberation, and pronesis, community wisdom can flourish. So Bernstein is saying that if you look at the political world, especially in a time when there is a lot of division and friction, we've got to create, and this is what good advocacy does. And I think you saw our attempts yesterday in the roundtable, in the webinar. You've got to create good spaces, and the types of spaces where people can come together and debate, talk to each other, where they can encounter each other in their formation. This is what I think, this is how I've been formed. These are the principles that I base my submissions on, base my ideas on. This is the foundation that I use. That's the formation, clarification. What do you really mean by that? What do we really understand by using that phrase? Because very often in politics, we get into very complicated language, very specialized language that only insiders know. And that's not always clear to everybody. And that kind of clarification can happen when we're speaking one with another. So the clarification aspect is important, the testing of opinions, and that when we talk about creating spaces for advocacy, I think Bernstein's right. That's what we need to be able to bring out of those spaces. And if we do, then we are really on the mark. We are creating the word that was used this morning, a dialogue that has leverage. And just a quote from Pope Francis in around the same issue, and that old saying, going back to even pre-Christian times, that that participating in politics is one of the highest forms of charity because it seeks the common good. It's a religious way of saying what Bernstein said. So just again to help us, 3 A's that must be really looked at if we're going to be faithful to our advocacy, and if we're going to dig deep, and if we're going to allow people to develop through our work into being their own spokespersons, giving their own idea of what needs to happen. Agency, which we looked at earlier, which means that people have the ability to make their own decisions. They have been informed, those words we looked at, they've been informed, they've thought things through, they've looked at options, and now they are in a position where they can speak for themselves, where they have agency over their own actions and ideas, and can bring that to the fore. The assets, I think it's an important thing, and I think in the world of justice and peace, lots of people are looking now at a methodology that looks at assets when deciding what kind of action to use, because we think of assets as possessions that we have, and that's correct, but we don't often acknowledge that those who we think are without assets have their own assets. And so we have to be very careful in our advocacy that not only do we build up and develop agency, but that we also take into account the assets, the experiences, the life journeys that people have, and what that's given them, what it's equipped them with, what insights it's developed. They have those assets, and they also have other assets which can be used very often, physical assets. So we mustn't develop an advocacy strategy that doesn't take into account what those we are doing advocacy with have in their own possession. And then many writers are using the word appreciation, how people are able to use their strengths so that they can make positive contributions to a shared vision and a better future that's grounded in reality. So it's agency, developing the agency, developing their ability to stand on your own 2 feet and to make your own case, to give reasons why. It's the harnessing, the bringing together of the assets of the people who are doing the advocacy, who are being helped by the advocacy, and then an appreciation for what people bring into the process and how that can be highlighted. So these are 3 very important aspects that emerge from a lot of the contemporary writing on advocacy, both in the religious domain and in the secular domain. Just 3 different writers. Amartya Sen, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics some years ago, writing from the subcontinent of India, very conscious of an economics that does justice. He's written widely and is read across ideological divides. He says, public debates, I see there's an error there. Public debates and discussions can also play a major part in the formation of values. Not only is the force of public discussion one of the correlates of democracy with an extensive reach, but its cultivation can also make democracy work better. It's quite a powerful statement. That the advocacy we do, the discussions, the debates that we do, not only deepens our democracy or helps democracy to work better, it also helps us to be better participants in the process. David Tracy, so they write at the same time. The Amartya Sen says that coming out of the Far Eastern tradition. David Tracy, an American theologian, writes that conversation has some hard rules. Say only what you mean, say it as accurately as you can, listen to and respect what the other says, however different or other, be willing to correct or defend your opinion if challenged by the conversation partner, and be willing to argue if necessary, to confront if demanded, and to change your mind if the evidence suggests it. I think it's a very practical, almost ordinary rule for advocacy. So, just to speak openly, to speak honestly, to speak in a respectful way, and to allow the depth of somebody else's argument to also persuade you. It goes against what we see happening in politics so often in so many countries, all of our countries and others, where to win the argument is more important than to benefit from the argument. And so I think in our advocacy, we need to be aware of David Tracy's rules for conversation and engagement. Finally, Tom Lodge, who's from this country, makes the point that the vigor of institutions like Parliament, political parties, and local councils, as well as the political impartiality of public institutions, depends as much on what happens outside and around them as on their inner life. So he makes an important point, which is important for us. He's saying it's not only what happens in Parliament that is important, but it's about what we create outside of Parliament that influences what happens within Parliament. We gave the example earlier in our little discussion around how in engaging MPs, they often think of how that translates into benefit for them, into votes. So that's one example, maybe a negative example, but there are also positive examples that what we do around Parliament, the work we all do in our different areas, also influences what happens inside. We must never underestimate the importance and the power of leverage outside of Parliament and its ability to influence what happens inside of Parliament. These are really quite important insights, and I've chosen them because they come, one from Africa, one from the North, and one from Asia, to show that there is a commonality of thinking around these issues and around what is important in advocacy. Anybody have any comments on how any of these three play out or work out in your situations, or how you maybe encountered them in your situations? Well, Henry is not here to ask the first question at the moment, so somebody else will have to take his place as being the first responder. Somebody think of their work. I know you have an excuse because you've only been in the job 4 months, but you think of your work, think of what you're doing, and maybe see if it fits into any of those categories, or is an example of one of those categories. Yes.
It's just a thought.
Yeah, no, we enjoy thoughts.
Yeah, because I remember when I was asked to read out the statement, kind of a declaration that came out about homosexuality. So I read that statement, that declaration in the church, but of course, there was no avenue to hear what those people, those who are actually homosexuals, are thinking about and their responses. So when I hear about creating a platform for them, or let's say agency for them to speak for themselves, I think that is very important when we are doing advocacy, that sometimes we give them maybe that space to hear what do they think, and also to hear their responses, maybe their suggestions, and then maybe to help us to carry out. Yeah, so it's just a...
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I think Bernstein is talking about when he said to create those spaces where people can speak and support each other and clarify, because it's incredible just how much prejudice we carry with us. People think about, since you've raised the LGBTQI plus community, and their prejudices form how they think, and sometimes they even translate their prejudice into facts.
Yeah.
You know, this is a fact, whereas in fact, it's not. It's somebody's prejudice, and often strengthened by the faith community. So, so the place for clarification, for discussion, for saying is an important space. The example is a very good one. Was this the document that came out from the Vatican on relationships
Yeah.
that can be blessed, or?
Yes.
Okay. Any other examples of where your work might be located in terms of these three important insights or aspects, rather, of advocacy?
Most politicians in Kenya, in regard to point 2, don't mean what they say, especially during campaigns. They say this before election, and what they do after is totally different thing. So it's good that we have encouragement from the president, saying that at least we should mean what we say.
Say it openly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm relating closely to what David Tracy has said, especially when it comes to submitting memorandums in Parliament. There's a way it should be drawn up. So when he says conversations has some hard rules, say only what you mean, say it as accurately as you can, listen and respect what others say. So saying what I mean and saying it accurately. So when it comes to the memorandum, I shouldn't go to so many stories and unnecessary stories that don't speak to what the issue is. I should go directly to the point whenever I'm submitting memorandums to Parliament. And also be open to receiving a response from them, if and when they'll ever respond.
I think I'm seeing a lot of, just in the earlier discussion and in this one now, quite a lot of similarities in what we're doing about integrity of our work and integrity of what we present, and the a thought through approach, and what Father mentioned earlier today, the nature of a dialogical position, that we are engaged in dialogue with each other, that none of us have all the answers straight away. We learn from each other and with each other all the time, and that strengthens the need for those kinds of spaces that Bernstein talks about in order to get to that point of clarification. Any other comments of where we go with this?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, okay.
To point the church and other organizations of the civil society, we tried and we managed to prevent post-conflict election. And then we came up with what we called the observation mission. And this observation mission, we were 61 civil society organizations. we asked the president of the Episcopal Conference, yesterday, this commission, to lead this observation mission. Then the purpose was to meet these various government institutions and even the political parties. We managed, yes, to the Constitutional Court accepted and welcomed us, and General Plenary also managed to receive us. There were opposition parties also. But there are some, like the Supreme Court, and the other, the Electoral National Commission, and MPLA, political, well, the political party in power since 1975, were refused to receive us. Well, what we wanted is a focus, so that the election would be peaceful at least. But we were refused. How is it possible to have a biological, in this case, approach if they are refusing to talk to us, for instance?
Off the top of my head, I think one, and others can comment, one of the reasons that we spend much time in strengthening the relationships between other institutions and ourselves in the civil society world is because we realize that the stronger our arguments and the stronger our force and the more representative of the bigger group that our organization is likely to weigh down those who don't want to participate. So, you know, it's often true that those who hold power don't feel the need to enter into engagement. A, because it's threatening, B, because they don't feel they can benefit, many reasons. But when we organize and strengthen civil society's organizations and we start showing the power and the footprint of those organizations, before long they have to talk to you because you represent an increasingly big size of the community. So I think that's part of the reason why we spend time building up these relationships. Because the stronger we are, the less easy it is to just dismiss us. If you only, I think it came through in 2 or 3 of the quotes earlier, if you only are going to want to engage those who have power, you're going to be frustrated for a lot of the time. But if you want to change power, you've got to look at other dynamic ways of doing it. And we say in the church often that there are, and many would argue that there are 3 aspects of the Catholic social teaching theory of change. This is not absolute in any way, but there are people who would argue this. They would say that, and the Jesuits are very known for this, that if you're going to get change, your long-term vision must be around education. You must educate the person, not only in the brain, but in the heart and in all ways, so that their opinion, their understanding, their formation allows them to be open to change. Alongside that, so, you know, what you could broadly call education, alongside that, you've got to have activists, people who are prepared to go out there and wave flags and, protest and do all the things that activists are doing. And the two go together. And the third thing is to do advocacy where we know decisions are being made. So it's not only in Parliament, although Parliament is a huge area. In many countries, justice and peace organizations are also looking at the boardrooms, at people who hold corporate power, because very often their power is as strong as a state's power, even stronger. And so decisions they make in the boardroom can have all sorts of effects across the world or across their country. And therefore, to strengthen, to be at that place is also important. So wherever decisions are made, and that the three together, the education broadly speaking, the activism and the advocacy at the point of where changes are made and where changes can happen, that those three together form a powerful theory of change. And that helps to understand why we can't just hope to have dialogue with the powerful. I think when you go back in the notes on this, you look at Mary Hopgood's statement that we looked at as a reflection point, where she says before, in previous times, the church looked to people in power to make the changes. Now, as people on the ground receive agency, they are making the changes. And so I think we just need to be aware of all of that so that we don't only think that success means making changes with those who are in power. Very long answer to a very short question. Sorry, yes, I see the hand, please.
C'est plutôt, je voulais plutôt intervenir pour
I wanted to intervene too.
essayer de commenter par rapport
I wanted to comment
à votre exposé.
to your presentation because you are speaking about to create space
Où les gens peuvent discuter.
Where people can discuss
Le bon problème de plaidoyer.
About advocacy.
Nous allons essayer de partager l'expérience du DLP Sanko.
We are going to try to share with you the experience of our office.
Liaison avec le Parlement DLP Sanko de Kinshasa.
Our office in Kinshasa
est très engagé dans ces processus de plaidoyer en organisant des réunions.
Is very engaged in advocacy.
Les différentes structures de la société civile.
In different structures.
Et parfois on fait appel aux élus.
And sometimes
ceux qui sont appelés à influencer les décisions et ceux qui sont appelés à
decisions.
Et pour la petite histoire, dernièrement, nous avons eu une réunion participative.
And recently we participated in a discussion.
Dans le cadre du projet lutte contre le tabac, la lutte anti-tabac.
Which was about combat the tobacco.
Puisque le tabac, c'est un fléau.
Because it causes problems.
Une vraie problématique pour la RDC.
It's such a big challenge for our country, DRC.
Alors, dans le cadre de ce projet, nous avions eu dernièrement une réunion participative.
So
recently, nous avons fait appel.
So recently we had a meeting about that.
Aux députés nationaux, aux médias.
Where we call the media, different parties, politics.
De la société civile et surtout les gouvernements.
And civil society, and especially the governments.
Représentés par le programme de lutte anti-tabac au sein du gouvernement, du ministère de la Santé.
Represented by the Society of Health.
Alors, puisque c'était une réunion participative, en fait, un espace de travail, cela nous a permis d'évaluer l'état des lieux de la lutte anti-tabac en RDC.
So since it was a meeting, it did allow us to evaluate the problem of society.
Alors, ce qui nous a poussé à retenir
This pushed us to
des
learn
actions à mener pour le gouvernement qui est sorti et qui vient d'être investi hier. Pour mener des actions
this has led us to maintain actions
auprès du gouvernement qui vient d'être investi hier.
to the government which has been just created yesterday.
Alors, allons dans le sens des votés de loi, des projets de loi.
So now we're going to be able to vote for the
Donc,
law
d'initier des projets de loi
and initiate the law of
des projets de loi.
and going to be able to initiate a project of law.
Donc, ça nous a permis d'évoluer parce qu'on s'est rendu
So
compte
this
de
allow us to progress because
l'état des lieux de la législation congolaise par rapport à cette question.
comparing to that challenge,
L'état des lieux de la législation congolaise par rapport à la question de la lutte anti-tabac.
the legislature of DRC comparing to the tobacco.
Alors, ensemble, nous avons pu évoluer.
So together we're able to make some progress.
Donc, c'est pour dire que les espaces de travail jouent un rôle très important.
So this is to say that the work has played a big role.
Parce que chacun de son côté apporte les vraies problématiques et ensemble,
because each and everyone bring problems together.
Au travers des discussions,
and together through discussion,
vous pouvez trouver des vraies solutions pour savoir comment mener les plaidoyers.
You can find solutions to see how you can advocate about all these problems.
Et il est important de signaler ou de souligner
and it's very important to underline or to
que ces
highlight
initiatives proviennent du BLP Centro.
To underline that the initiative is coming from our office BLP in GRC.
Et demain, si on publie, si le projet de loi est voté et promulgué,
and tomorrow, if the project of law is published,
ça sera une réussite en fait.
So it's going to be a success.
Donc, c'est un peu ça.
Thank you.
So that's it.
Thank you. That's exactly the kind of dynamic and that this theory speaks about, that you are exercising very powerfully. Thank you for sharing that. It just shows that there's it's not just in theory, but also in action, that this is a workable. Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Father.
Yeah, maybe just to add on what Father Celestino said, that you see, as observers, they were not given that opportunity to. Yeah, because, you know, there is a saying, they say when two giants are fighting, what suffers is the grass.
Yeah.
So now, that's why it is important that those avenues are created, maybe to have dialogue, not to wait until something happens, because this was the case, maybe still the case, I don't know, if you look at the war in Gaza. So Israel has got its own decisions. They made the decisions already that they are going to continue bombing until they achieve what they want to achieve. Now here comes the aid, the relief aid. Those who want to bring in food, they are blocked. So that means if there was maybe a dialogue between the two, then at least maybe they would see how to get the relief in. But because there is no dialogue, so these are the two powerful people, so each one has got decisions. So that also make our advocacy ineffective, because the two powers there, they are fighting, and of course, as I said, what suffers is the grass. Yeah, I was just giving a thought regarding that. It is very important that we create those agencies here for dialogue here.
Because in the world affairs, those have become complicated, so one has to look at which countries have tried to open spaces, Qatar, others, whether it's worked and whether those propositions, but I mean, at least you must have a space to start off with. And that's at the heart of advocacy.
Maybe that's for those of us who have never done theology. If you could explain a bit what public theology is. I just saw it on the road.
Yeah. I said this morning that theology, which is really, suppose, the study of God, theos, and the word of God, logos. So how do we talk about God? How do we use words about God? That's what theology is generally all about. But then within that, there are many specialities, many things that are focused. Remember this morning I said some people specialize in sacramental theology, how the sacraments work and how you can look at them for our present times or not look at them. That pertains to the sacraments, and that's sacramental theology. Public theology is about how the church lives and engages other people in public spaces. So public spaces are those spaces where decisions are made or where discussions are had that are bigger than us as a group of Catholics or Christians. So it's not inward looking. It's saying, how do we speak about God when we relate to other people around political issues or policy issues that affect all of us, whether we Christian or Buddhist or Muslim, whether we black or white, whether we citizens or non-citizens. How do these issues that we are talking about as ways of binding our country into one, how do they affect the public? And what do we as Christians have to say about that? So the public space is bigger than the areas that other people might be interested in theology. It's bigger than the sacraments. It affects our life together, but not just our life together, specifically our public life. The way we are governed, the way we create structures of governing, those things that make us a public. That's what this theology looks at. Does that begin to? Thank you. Maybe we just have 2 more slides left, I think, and they are more inspirational than aspirational. I mean, today more than ever, the church is aware that the social message will gain credibility more immediately from the witness of actions than as a result of internal logic and consistency. In the countries of the West, different forms of poverty are being experienced by groups which live on the margins of society, by the elderly, the sick, the victims of consumerism, and even more immediately by so many immigrants and refugees. Comes from the document from Centenimus Annus, which was one of the last documents of John Paul II. No, it wasn't one of the last, it was a document by him. It was on the centenary of the first social encyclical, Rerum Novarum, so 100 years later. And I think I just want us to remember that the credibility will come from the actions, not from the internal, from internal discussions only. Those need to lead to actions. And as we said this morning, it's broad-based. I pointed out the exultate et gaudate comment where the Pope says in that encyclical that you can't rank various injustices. You've got to take them all together. They're all part of the same pathology, the same difficulty, the same human wrong, and you can't give priority to some and say others are of a lesser breed. So that's just a reminder. And then the last line in this is just a quote from a speech which was given not so far from here by the late Robert Kennedy, President Kennedy's brother, when he spoke at Cape Town University. And it's just again emphasizing and underlining that each of us has a role to play, that no one person changes history. The human race together, people working together, people looking out for each other, people saying no to what is wrong and getting together to work. These are the waves, the ripples of change that allow bigger changes to happen. So just a little inspiration at the end from a speech given just a few kilometers down the road to end off. So that's my overview of the theology of advocacy. I'm happy to, I mean, we've had 2 occasions to intervene, but if there's further comment and insights from your side, especially, that I think we could all benefit from, this is a good moment to explore those. Thank you.